Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff held nearly 5 hours of Kremlin talks on a potential Ukraine peace settlement, including revisions to a leaked 28-point U.S. draft plan. Russian aide Yuri Ushakov said Washington presented 4 additional documents addressing major sticking points: territorial concessions, security guarantees, NATO status, and limits on Ukraine's military. Discussions follow mounting Ukrainian battlefield losses and corruption scandals around Zelensky's circle. Before Moscow, Witkoff met Ukrainian officials in Florida for tough negotiations reportedly focused on territory. Although Zelensky publicly rejects concessions, talks now center on frontline setbacks and growing pressure from the U.S. and EU. Ahead of negotiations with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Russian President Vladimir Putin issued stark warnings to Europe, claiming Russia is peaceful but fully prepared for a rapid, overwhelming conflict it provoked. He asserted that a war launched by Europe would leave nobody to negotiate with, contrasting Europe with the surgical precision he claims Russia uses in Ukraine. Putin blamed European and NATO members for obstructing peace efforts and preventing the U.S. from finalizing a settlement. Kremlin officials said the nearly 5-hour Moscow talks were constructive but yielded no breakthrough, noting that some proposals remain unacceptable. No follow-up meeting with President Trump was scheduled, though future phone discussions are planned. Reuters reports that U.S. President Donald Trump issued Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro a 1-week ultimatum to flee the country, following expanding U.S. military pressure and lethal strikes on boats accused of drug smuggling. During a November 21st call, President Trump rejected most of Maduro's conditions for leaving, including amnesty from U.S. sanctions, dismissal of his ICC case, and lifting sanctions on over 100 Venezuelan officials. Maduro proposed a transitional government led by Vice President Delcy Rodriguez until elections. After the deadline expired, President Trump declared Venezuela's airspace closed. Washington calls Maduro a cartel-linked illegitimate ruler. Caracas claims the U.S. seeks regime change to seize resources. Former Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, who left office in 2024 under unclear circumstances, has reemerged alleging President Volodymyr Zelensky removed him because polling showed Kuleba slightly more popular. In an interview with La Repubblica, he said he predicted disaster after a survey showed him 1 point ahead of Zelensky. Kuleba, known for securing foreign weapons and maintaining a traditional diplomatic style, argued Ukrainians want a democratic reset and elections would occur immediately after a ceasefire. While warning Ukraine's battlefield situation is worsening and difficult decisions loom, he said a rushed bad peace deal could destabilize the nation. Kuleba also welcomed ongoing anti-corruption investigations and warned NATO must prepare for potential war with Russia. Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch faced off in a charged PMQ session.
If all of this is true, why did he take the whip away from the people who are asking for it? Let's remind the Chancellor, exactly a year ago today, on the 3rd of December 2024, the Chancellor said, "We will never have to repeat a budget like this one." If only. He may have taken the whip away, but the rebels had the last laugh. The Prime Minister has lost. He can't run his own party. He can't, let alone the country, Mr. Speaker. Let me quote what the hard-left former Shadow Chancellor said. He said, "We've won." He's right, isn't he?
Prime Minister. Speaker, I've said repeatedly that bringing down child poverty is a moral mission, a political mission, and a personal mission. They drove hundreds of thousands of children into poverty who will pay the price for the rest of their lives for their failure.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
There is a problem with medicine, and we can explain what it is by looking back to the discovery of penicillin. Penicillin, it turns out, was not just an accidental finding. Alexander Fleming discovered that mold he found in a culture dish was killing bacteria. But it took over 10 years before a team at Oxford University were able to isolate the active ingredient. They produced small quantities for preclinical and clinical trials, helping prove the compound was safe and could beat infection. However, they couldn't produce it at scale. In 1941, Andrew Jackson Moyer of the US Department of Agriculture, the forerunner to the FDA, suggested changes to the manufacturing process, enabling mass production. It turns out medicines are not invented when someone discovers a new molecular entity. They are the product of key stakeholders working together collaboratively. Until medicine can be manufactured at scale, it may as well not exist. And in 2025, this is a problem. In the 1980s, pharmaceutical companies began outsourcing production. Suddenly the system was significantly less integrated. Someone with a new discovery today will find themselves disconnected from the rest of the development and manufacturing process. Companies that develop medicine are still happy to work with big established pharma companies, but the modern day Flemings are cut out of the system. The result is far fewer new medicines coming to market. We want to fix this by ensuring the pharma industry builds a more integrated supply chain. We also believe that doctors' expertise administering medicine should be included at the beginning of the process. We know that doctors on the front line have insights about how to repurpose medicine. Doctors should be able to report their findings so that the necessary testing can be completed and they can share their results worldwide. Learn more here and help us take medicines back to the future.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
To the protagonists topic today is controversial, but it does need to be talked about. The Muslim Brotherhood, a secret society. There's a lot of discussion about the Islamification of the UK, but are we missing the wood for the trees? The Muslim Brotherhood is a well-known extremist political movement of global influence, which has its aims as a global Islamic caliphate. It has many branches sporting deadly organisations such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hezbollah, and of course Hamas. It's banned in countries such as the UAE, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. It hides behind a massive funding base and legal umbrella in the UK and hundreds of organisations such as charities, NGOs, and human rights groups. Question is the UK the financial centre and the facilitator of the biggest jihadist terrorist network in the world? As explained recently by a British Egyptian counter-terror expert, London has become one of the three global capitals of Islam, alongside Doha in Qatar and Istanbul in Turkey. The question now is, why isn't the Muslim Brotherhood prescribed as a terror organisation in the UK? Its nature and activities are well known. The US has already done so. What is stopping this happening in the UK? Has it reached its zenith of influence, or is there more to come? Let's learn more about the Muslim Brotherhood and its UK activities from our panel. Today our panel is just stunning, to say the least. Nuriya Khan, ex-Muslim and host of Beyond Belief, Dr. Bertie Powell, Melbourne School of Theology, and Dr. Nihad Khan, a senior lecturer in law and politics. First of all, thank you for joining me. Nuriya, can you tell us your thoughts on the Brotherhood and tell us how dangerous they really are? Because you've seen all this before.
Yeah, sure. So for me, initially, I was a nominal Muslim, and once I had kind of deep dived into the theology myself, due to my own past lived experience, And I actually was looking at it from the outside because I understood the political elements and the possibility for radicalization and where terrorist groups would get their inspiration from directly from the Islamic scriptures. And being like living in the UK, when I was starting to understand that in the UK context, I was absolutely flabbergasted at the level of kind of extremist pockets that we have infiltrating different various sectors of society within the UK. And I'm talking everything from the secondary schools that our children attend, or kind of council-led workshops that our fellow colleagues are forced to attend by virtue of the sector that they work in. And it just screamed tactics of Muslim Brotherhood to me once I understood that this organization doesn't operate with the mindset of a offensive, physical, old world style jihad. And this is a very concerted effort to use nefarious tactics, which I'm sure we'll unpack further in this discussion, but using entryism first and foremost and grievance politics to really infiltrate white collar institutions of society and position themselves as almost anti-discriminatory training so that anybody who opposes it is seen as bigoted. And the biggest win that we've seen here, I think their biggest success story so far, has been the use of this word Islamophobia, which has been such a renowned success across the Western world, because these are things that, you know, in the UK we're grappling with right now with the Labour Party in charge and whether they're trying to push for that bill. And you look at the organizations behind that, such as the Council of Muslims of Britain, and you just, again, it screams Muslim Brotherhood tactics. If you understand how they have been set up from, you know, especially the post-Qutbist era, they try and distance themselves from violence, and we really see that play out in the UK with their non-violent tactics.
Dr. Bertie Powell, tell us about the what your thoughts are on the Brotherhood.
Yeah, it's probably good to think of it maybe in comparison to, say, Marxism. So it's an ideology, first of all, expansionist. It's got world aims or perspectives that it's working on, and then able to disperse into a whole lot of different groups and coalitions and organizations. But it's not really something that you can nail down very easily, because it's won't have just one organization. So it's not like, for example, Google organization, which has got a structure, but rather it's much more diffuse and it goes all through the society. So you will have some maybe very clear groups, for example, the Muslim Association of Britain, that are clearly espousing MB ideologies, but then you'll have other institutions that they may be, for example, Muslim aid groups, but then also at the lower level you have individuals who, just in their normal everyday work, working in hospitals or schools or factories, will be promoting Muslim Brotherhood ideas. So it's really hard to say this is what it is and this is how we respond to it, because there are so many different levels of it and different ways of operating. So it's really quite a difficult challenge to work with and to work against.
And our third guest is Dr. Nihad Kanfar. Can you just tell me your thoughts, and if you could illuminate just a titch on why nothing is still being done with the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood? We see Middle Eastern countries doing something about it, are very wary of it, and you see the US, but the UK, it's just doing nothing at the moment. Is this because they're still trying to? I have no idea what they're trying to do, but they are placing their citizens in danger.
Well, I believe none of the European countries really have any take against the Brotherhood, apparently, apart from Austria, which designated the Brotherhood in 21 as being illegal organization. None of the other European countries, even the European Union, when you look at the overall political decision, you wouldn't find really any trace of condemning or illegalizing or designating the Brotherhood as being, a terror organization, for example, or illegitimate political organization. Having said that, I think there was a conflation at the beginning because you mentioned Hezbollah. Hezbollah certainly is not anywhere near the Brotherhood because they are coming from different ideology, coming from different sect, which is the Shia, and the Brotherhood is coming from the Sunni background. In addition to that, we have to look really very carefully about the description, which I believe to very far extent, I agree with the two guests that they are quite popular. They are very well organized simply because they have started very early when it comes to the Islamist organizations. And you can call them the mothers of all Islamist organizations when it comes to the Sunni part of the story. So started 1927 in Egypt with Hassan al-Banna, and then expanded across all the Muslim world, not necessarily in the Arab world. Now, being designated in the Middle East, in some of the Arab and Muslim countries, and not being designated in the other European countries, it's certainly about politics. Because academically speaking, we have to differentiate between what is political and what is legal. Now, when it comes to the UK, I believe there is some kind of exaggeration of the existence of the Brotherhood, whether from the ideological point of view or the social point of view. Because here we are, I think, we are really committing a serious mistake, and that is conflating between the ideological brotherhood and the normal, ordinary Muslim, whether we are talking about the Muslims coming from the Arab background, where the brotherhood was really flourishing and prospering, and on the other hand, we are risking the fact that we are giving the brotherhood much bigger space than it's supposed to be. And this is would really certainly bringing many of the ordinary Muslims who know nothing about the brotherhood, and they have no any interaction with the brotherhood socially or politically. Now, if they are to be a secret or if they are to be designated, I am sure the intelligence would be much better in deciding about this. And it seems to be the intelligence agencies have not said anything about it. They haven't really designated, they haven't classified, they haven't recommend any kind of action, which means, in this case, the organizations who are acting based on the Islamic agenda, if we may say that, of course, it means they are really abiding the law, which means when the USA taking a decision to designate the brotherhood, it wasn't really about all the brotherhood, because if you remember, the statement was about some branches of the brotherhood, not necessarily all the branches of the brotherhood. And this is something I think, we are expecting a long journey before some organizations being designated to be designated. So a lot of things to be said about this, and to me, I have really to tread very carefully when I am making a judgment with regard to the brotherhood and who are the brotherhood. I'm pretty sure the brotherhood would be very happy to be taken in that serious and exaggeration manner to say that every single ordinary Muslim means belong to the brotherhood and their ideology.
Nuria, what do you think?
Obviously, it doesn't come down to each individual Muslim. There are plenty of Muslims who have no common ground with the Muslim Brotherhood and their agenda and their ideology whatsoever. That's absolutely a given. But we have to remember that the wider mission of the Brotherhood and their agenda is, for me, what seems like to be the most political manifestation of, some of the core tenets of Islam, where their famous motto literally states that Allah is our objective, the Prophet is our leader, the Quran is our law, and jihad is our way. Now, you do ask nominal Muslims, and jihad in the modern era can take on many different forms. Some of the very, very liberal Muslims will say it's just an internal struggle, and the most extreme Muslims would say it is offensive jihad until the rest of the world, which they consider the infidel West, comes under the remit of Islam. And like I said, some of the most ardent intellectual founders or kind of revivalists of that brotherhood have gone to Western countries, literally seen what they call the absolute filth of the West, the way that the women present. And that's another thing with the Muslim Brotherhood. Women are kind of at the forefront of their social battlefield, so to speak. So they actually consider these lands forsaken, and that they almost need to purify them. And the only way to do that is through Islam. So yes, there are obviously chapters of the Brotherhood that are more successful than others, and that those vary across the Western countries. But the reason that the UK hasn't cracked down, I would say, on some of them as harshly is just because of a weakness that the Brotherhood tried to use themselves, which is the threshold that the democracy has for varied ideas, and the threshold that democracy has for some extreme ideas as well. I mean, you have, like, Austria has cracked down, for example. Germany still refuses to crack down in the same way that we do here in the UK. America have now realized organizations like the Council of American Islamic Relations could have affiliations with the Brotherhood. And I think in the UK, if we look at the Council of Muslims Britain, if we look at organizations like MEND, Muslim Engagement and Development, we've had key figures like Mark Rowley and Michael Gove actually stand up and say in Parliament that these organizations have some very nefarious characters who have supported terrorism around the world, who chant anti-Semitic narratives and go into schools and present their ideas like that. And they have also got very shady funding channels, and yet nothing is done about that. So I think this is a bit of a weak flashpoint within democracy that the Muslim Brotherhood actually thrive on exploiting.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, and just going back to what Dr. Kanfar said, if they're a secret society, they're doing a pretty good job of it. And I think Dr. Kanfar was saying that that we are overplaying this by a lot. Bertie, what's your thoughts? I mean, we hear about it. I believe it is true. I've been told here that perhaps we're overplaying the severity of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that if they were as popular as what we're saying, according to Dr. Kanfar, is that they would be having these great big smiles on their faces because they're achieving notoriety even quicker than they had imagined. But having said that, do you believe the Muslim Brotherhood exists? And as a secret society, that's what secret societies do, isn't it? They become secret.
Yeah. So there's two things going on here. One is that they want to project themselves as more important than they really are, and to claim, history is with us, the people are with us, therefore you have to take us seriously, you have to give us a voice, you have to give in and make concessions to us. So that's one thing. But at the other end, and as I mentioned before, these three different levels, one which is the high profile organisational level, where they'll have spokespersons, the middle one where they'll have organisations which may be affiliated to them but not openly declaring themselves, and then the third level, the individuals. So they want to keep as low a profile as possible, and at the same time they don't necessarily need all Muslims to to support them or to openly support them. When Hassan al-Banna started the organization back in Egypt in 1928, he began by building schools and hospitals and doing food programs, which incidentally is what Hamas did in Gaza in order to win the vote, which they won the elections there. And this was just to have their ideas made acceptable and people to think, oh, well, the Muslim Brotherhood are a good society. They care for us as people. They're not violent, or they're not espousing violence, at least in those early stages, but really they're a good social organization. And then later on, Hassan al-Banna got involved in politics and they started putting forward candidates. And then ultimately they moved into the violent stage where they started executing Egyptian politicians, including assassinating the Egyptian Prime Minister, I think it was in 1958. So you've got these three different tools, and they use the tools according to the situation and according to the need. And they can draw on those. So you can see Hamas is quite happy to fire rockets into Israel and say, well, this is part of our struggle. But in other places, it may be setting up an Islamic school or a museum or something that makes them much more acceptable to the general public as well as to the Muslim public. So I think that's why it makes them very difficult to tie down. But as Nouria says, they're also very anti-Western, and so they'll do anything that they can to undermine the Western world by critiquing it. And one of their natural allies with that are the Marxists, who say, yeah, the capitalist system needs to be dismantled. They're very strong on grievance and victimhood and identity politics, and the left jumps on board with them with that. And so they're able to have these kind of allies who are not necessarily their natural allies, because when push comes to shove, they'll push them and shove them, but they'll work, and it's this kind of long march through the institutions approach that they're taking. And so that's why they may not appear to be very visible in the society, but they certainly are there.
Dr. Kanfar, would you like to add to that?
Yes, it is quite entertaining, really, to remember that very significant part of the Brotherhood leadership were visibly working and functioning in the UK, like the head of the Brotherhood in Tunisia before, when he was in the exile. All his exile was in London. Rashid al-Ghannouchi, here I refer to. When it comes to the other countries, you will find really a very important part of the leadership of the Brotherhood were usually welcomed even by the USA. And we know that the USA really endorsed and approved the leadership of the Brotherhood in Egypt when the Brotherhood won the election. So they were sleeping in the same bed, as a matter of fact. And to very far extent, why I would really give any credit to Michael Gove, where he has really too many things to answer when it comes to the other ideologies, whether the right-wing ideologies, and of course to his extremist affiliation to the extremist part of the Zionism. So many different things really to be answered when it comes to how we deal with the Brotherhood, how we see them. Again, academically speaking, I'll try just to avoid really being a political commentator here. Academically speaking, we have to see what kind of violent actions taken by the Brotherhood or anyone affiliated to the Brotherhood, whether we are talking about individuals or organizations. Now, if we say none of the violent actions were really recorded against the Brotherhood in Europe or in the West, we wouldn't say it is a violent organization. And to very far extent, the two highly respected guests, that they mentioned that they are using non-violent strategies, non-violent techniques in order really to spread out, which is something I think even the liberal democracy would be welcoming that. But again, if they are very much organized, then good for them. But I believe, again, from the academic point of view, because they are in the scene at the very early uh, time of the political history of the Middle East, then they got organized, they got expanded, but we shouldn't underestimate the other parts of the story, which is the other political factions, which they were fully supported by, the people. They were all also popular. Um so whether we are saying that the brotherhood can be really something, you know, occupying the whole scene of the Muslim platforms, I just urge everyone really listening just to revise this and to give it more thought in order really to get the picture right. Otherwise, I'm telling you, the one to be accused or to be convicted with this is the political establishment in Europe, the political establishment in the West. Because if you are looking at what's happening in the Middle East and then finding this kind of a wide space where, as described earlier, where the Brotherhood are functioning, then the credit and the question would be asked why the establishment is allowing this.
Actually, it's a great question, but if you look at establishments, and I'll keep this going with you if you don't mind. If you look at the establishments such as in the UAE, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, look at the US, they've designated that it's a prescribed terrorist org. They have recognised it, or they believe they have recognised the severity of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the UK haven't. Can you tell me then why they haven't within the UK? Whereas I've mentioned 4 other countries, they have, but the UK hasn't. Are they wrong? Are the other countries wrong? Is the US wrong? Is Egypt, Saudi, or Qatar? Are they all wrong?
Well, certainly, I don't know. Under Trump administration, I don't know how much credit we can give really to the to the political practices in the USA. We we are all questioning a lot of decisions coming from the Trump administration. He is not allowing now many countries to be granted visas, from the third world countries, according to his definition. And when we look at his internal politics, it's very bizarre that today he might prescribe one of the Brotherhood branches, and then designate them, and tomorrow he might change his mind. And this is unfortunately what's happening in many different political fronts. We see what's happening with his decisions about the immigrations, about the tariffs, about. I mean, it's unlimited decisions anyway. It's very hard to follow now. I don't know. Maybe tomorrow he's gonna to praise the Brotherhood. This is the biggest problem. So is it something related to the establishment? Certainly no. In the USA, it seems to be they are not taking that serious decision, because we have to remember that Trump just came in the last 2 years. And when even he took the office at the first term, he never mentioned really the Brotherhood, or he never even, indicate any kind of actions to be taken against them. So we have to be very careful when it comes really to the Brotherhood. And if, of course, just to let you know, being a Muslim, Palestinian, and then British, I really stand firmly on the other camp of the story when it comes to the Brotherhood, from the ideological, political, and even religious point of view. But when it comes to my academic understanding, teaching this for so many years, because I teach a module called Islam and Modern Politics, so the Brotherhood at the heart of my discussion with my students all the time, I know for sure that none of the serious violent actions was really affiliated or related to the Brotherhood in the West. And this is something none of the European countries apparently recorded. All the crackdown ideas, and it depends of who is the minister, like Michael Gove. He has an agenda. We know that he has an agenda. He has an agenda with regard to, just to target any kind of entity supporting the Palestinians or the Palestinian narrative, and the Brotherhood might be part of that story. But we have to remember again that Erdogan, where the Brotherhood is prospering and flourishing politically, socially, and economically as well, he is a very important ally to the Israeli government for so many years before the genocide took place in Gaza. They did have really a very warm relation, and he is one of the main countries in the NATO as well in that region. So we have to make this kind of political balance when it comes really to the political interest and how the countries are dealing with it. So it's not all about black and white. It's about really to what extent the political interest being fulfilled to this country or to that country. One of the Brotherhood activities, by the way, it's happening in Israel, because part of their Knesset members, they are historically affiliated to the Brotherhood. This is just a side note.
Nuria, what do you think?
Yes, just a couple of points on that. I know obviously it was mentioned that, the Muslim Brotherhood started off being truly loved by the people, but we have to remember that many, radical movements start off as, populist movements, and even, come across as humanitarian in nature, as we can talk about the foundations of Hamas, for example, which is definitely the Palestinian chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood. And with the Muslim Brotherhood, obviously they came about in a time of in Egypt when there was a very anti-Western sentiment, a very anti-colonial, anti-imperialistic sentiment. And that's why even today we see the connection with Marxists within Europe, and we see that unholy alliance between the Islamists and the leftists. So I don't think that's a good enough reason to think that they're not existing here through other non-violent means just because they were once loved by their people in their original inception. And what we see in Western terms, what I've seen with organizations, grassroots ones, that have been challenged for these extremist mindsets or the way they're using entryism to force their way into, whether it's aspects of the British military, the Home Office, schools, councils, all these various levels of position, they always fight back, not through necessarily violent means, which I agree with. They fight back through lawfare. And they're not against using lawfare to their advantage, which, as I alluded to earlier, it is using the democratic process against the very ideals of a free Western liberal secular democracy itself. And that is their whole agenda, because what they consider the West to be is jahiliyyah, which is obviously in the state of ignorance. And that's the wider goal, which is why, people talk about the larger civilizational war that they are in with the West. So when you look at countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, you do see the approach that they've taken. Yes, they're authoritarian in nature, but they speak the same language as these people. They have the same religion, and they know how to crack down on it. So when you see the UAE funding movements, they fund very Muslim Brotherhood movements, so ones that have agendas that are completely antithetical to the Brotherhood. Whereas you look at countries like Qatar and Kuwait, who aren't taking those same steps. So it is very much a, another point, sorry, I just want to make is that in the beginning of this panel discussion, it was mentioned that Hezbollah is a completely different organization entirely, a terrorist network, because they're Shia. But let's not forget that in history, the Muslim Brotherhood are not averse to using any other organization, whether on the left, center, right, what have you, as long as they help fulfill their objective in some way or the other. And when we really see this come alive is in the beginning inceptions of the Ayatollah coming into power in Iran, because something like Palestine, which is why they all converge on this movement against Israel, is because Palestine was no longer seen as a Arab issue or a pan-Arab issue. It was at that moment the Sunni and Shia world coming together and saying, actually, this is an Islam issue. And if you look back to one of the main objectives of the Brotherhood, it is to completely distance Israel from the rest of the Western world and the protections that they think that America especially, but the larger Western world affords Israel. And so they will use whichever means necessary to accomplish that.
Bernie, I just want to, it says here that the British Egyptian counter-terror expert has said that London has become one of the three global capitals of Islam, alongside Doha and Qatar and Istanbul in Turkey. Why would that be an issue? Because what I'm just reading between the lines, does it mean that Islam doesn't fit in that well with the West, or am I just looking between the lines here? Because if Islam doesn't fit in with the West, and then we have the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, some are saying, is in the UK, and Dr. Kanfaru says that it's overhyped. I'm just wondering where this is leading, because if it's not if it can't fit in with the West, it's going to end in tears, isn't it?
Yeah, it'll end in tears for someone, and my fear is it'll end in tears for the West. Maybe just coming back to a comment that Dr. Nihad made before about the US. I don't think the US has a coherent foreign policy. You're right. Tomorrow, Donald Trump may say the Muslim Brotherhood, they're not such bad guys. And I don't think we need to take that too seriously. But we do need to think about what is the end goal of the Muslim Brotherhood. And as Mike said at the beginning, it's ultimately the establishment of a global Islamic caliphate. And they're happy to take generations to do that. They don't expect that this is going to happen in their own time, but they'll be working towards that. So they're very pragmatic in their tactics and very contextual, and they'll pick them up. And he mentioned how the Muslim Brotherhood have won elections, and they did certainly in Hamas, as I mentioned before, in the Palestinian territories, and in Egypt. And the reason for that was Hosni Mubarak, who was very much supported by the West, had become very corrupt. He'd become very oppressive to his own people. And the Egyptian people could see that. And then the Muslim Brotherhood comes and presents itself as the Freedom and Justice Party. And so people thought, yes, we do want freedom from this oppression we're receiving from Mubarak. We do want justice. We want access to the resources that he's been storing up for himself and his family. Let's vote for the Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, as soon as Mohammed Morsi got in, he started then changing the rules and trying to bring in some of these more things which would entrench him in power. And the Egyptians, to their credit, saw this within a year, and they then started these massive demonstrations, and ultimately they were able to force him out. And I think, and he also, Dr. Ni had also mentioned, and you mentioned, Mike, about Erdogan and Istanbul. Erdogan made this very famous quote. He said, "Democracy is a train, and we will get off when we reach our destination." So for him, it's very much we can use these Western things, which would be quite inimical to Islam in general, but use them as a way to fulfill our objectives. So this pragmatism, utilitarianism is a very strong theme within the Muslim Brotherhood. Just a little comment about and Nuria mentioned they see the West as Jahiliyyah. Actually, they see it as a lot worse than that. Jahiliyyah was the time of ignorance from the pre-Islamic time, the people who didn't know any better, but the West should know better. They would tend to see the kuffar, the unbelievers, as more najis, as unclean, and therefore their system needs to be completely dismantled and overhauled and replaced with an Islamic system, which is the ultimate goal that they're moving towards. And they'll aim for the centres. So, for example, the UK and London and New York. So we've got Islamic mayors in both of those places and in a whole lot of other places around the UK. So they'll use the system basically as a way to establish, to get a foothold. They'll infiltrate the establishment. They'll carve out a space. They'll spread their influence. They'll start dividing people into groups. So this whole idea of separate societies is happening. They'll create power structures, and they'll develop networks for themselves and also fellow travellers. And this is all building blocks towards the ultimate time when they can move to the establishment of the caliphate. So I think that's the end game. And in the middle of a game, it's sometimes hard to work out what the goal is, but I think they've already stated it at the very beginning what that was, and we need to be keeping our eyes on that as well.
Yeah, Dr. Kanfar, would you like to reply? And also, if you wouldn't mind, just because you mentioned that your students, you get into conversations with your students about the Muslim Brotherhood at times. What is the end goal of the Muslim Brotherhood? Is it a global caliphate?
Look, this is something was stated in their foundational document or deed or constitution. Because they consider the Quran to be their constitution anyway. But when they started their movement, the caliphate, I'm here analyzing really from the academic point of view, referring to the fall and the decline of the Ottoman Empire, which was like the maternal mother of the Muslims that time. So it was 24, and then the Brotherhood or Hassan al-Banna came 28, so 4 years. So the sentiments with the Muslims caliphate, considering the vicious colonial project in the region, so the sentiment were utilized politically in order to bring the Muslims behind the Brotherhood. Although Hassan al-Banna himself was working actually with the colonial project as well, because he was part of the British administration of the Suez Canal. So he was employed, by the way, when he founded or co-founded the Brotherhood. He was still at his admin position in the British administration. I don't know whether people know about this or not, but he was. The first mosque, by the way, was established as well, was near to the Suez Canal, and some of the fund came from the Suez Canal donations. Anyway, so looking at the Brotherhood and the Marxist, as was mentioned, that they did have this kind of common ground to fight against the Western values. We must not really forget that the very Brotherhood members, they were in a coalition with the Americans in Afghanistan to to fight against the Marxist, the Soviet Union. And this, by the way, caused a lot of troubles among all the ordinary Muslims, because many of the ordinary Muslims were misled, brought to Afghanistan to fight against the Marxism, supported by many of the Western countries, mainly the USA and the Gulf states. Yes. And this was happening with very high ranking leaders of the Brotherhood, like Abdullah Azzam, for example. He was the godfather of Osama bin Laden. So this was happening, and we know that Hillary Clinton, in one of her Congress hearing, she said it clearly. Let's be clear, we did sleep in the same bed with the Brotherhood, and we utilized their forces and their ideological approach in order to fight against the Soviet Union. And they were a very big part of the USA success in defeating the Soviet Union of that time, which means defeating the Marxism. So I'm saying that not in order really to show an naivety with regard to the description of the Brotherhood and to what extent they are popular or something like this. But I wanted to say that we must not forget that politics is so dirty and whether having the Brotherhood or any other ideology, we look at the far right coming from the Christian background. It can be described in the new Nazis coming nowadays, repeating the same, the anti-Islam narratives, like Islamophobic people, Islamophobic politicians, the anti-Semitism, this ugly use of the of many different fabrications in order to promote a political agenda. So we have too many things really around us telling us, unfortunately, the utilizations could be a very, very much about political interest, rather a real description or a true description of the picture. Yeah, so this is my take on overall discussion with regard really to the Brotherhood. But I doubt that the Brotherhood are being a secretive organization so far.
Nuria?
Yes, no, I agree insofar as politics does make for strange bedfellows. And so, at times you've seen Islamist groups align with or seemingly fight against the Soviets. But I think one thing at times that they hate more than Western imperialism is what they consider an absolutely godless society, or secularism in its most kind of stringent form. But I do think we have to be very wary with these conversations, because the fact that we can even throw around words like Islamophobia, like Dr. Nahad just did, I think does point to the success rate at how, the Muslim Brotherhood thus far have been successful in pushing even an agenda where we have to be mindful of what we say so as to, in the UK, not offend the quote unquote institution of Islam. And we're having discussions in this country as to whether or not a bill should be passed. And if you look within the clauses of that bill, it's extremely dangerous. I mean, I was a Muslim. I was born into the faith. I left it. And if I state a basic fact such as, Islam was spread by the sword, and Muhammad, the alleged prophet of Islam, was essentially a warlord, and he went on offensive battles, that would be considered Islamophobic, and my voice would be stifled in a seemingly Western democracy. And I think that only points to the fact that Islamists have gained traction through other non-violent means, and they've been largely successful in that, because there's an example of a school teacher, and I actually made a video about this because it struck me that the Free Speech Union had to come in and actually help fight a case, because this this woman of Pakistani origin went into a Scottish school, and two of her colleagues were having a discussion about book recommendations, and one of them recommended The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie because of the recent attack on him at the time. And this teacher brought a claim of Islamophobia against them because she said that this discussion was, it was offensive to her religion, and it was there to provoke her. And the fact that this was dragged through the court on the British taxpayers' funded money to waste time having discussions policing the language of two teachers in a school in Scotland just goes to show you, first of all, that they're not afraid to use lawfare, that she was the same teacher who brought in an Islamophobia awareness workshop, and they see everything through this eyes of the critical race theory and decolonization, and they're infiltrating the minds of the younger generation. So I'm also very interested in how Dr. Nahad's students approach these issues and what they're being taught in their textbooks in relation to organizations like Hamas and things like that, because you do genuinely see this new level of indoctrination where everything Western is seen through the lens of oppressor and oppressed, and somehow the Islamists are given either through the bigotry of low expectations or this kind of, we should respect their customs and not impose our moral superiority onto their values. It is leading to the detriment of Western society. So yes, politics does make for strange bedfellows in the past, but that's not to say that they've not infiltrated successfully many aspects and facets of society here.
Bernie, can Islam coexist with Christianity?
If you lived in a secular society where people were allowed to have freedom of religion and practice their religious faith, their rituals in ways that were in accord with everybody else in society, there would be no problem. And we have many cases of that where we've had Muslims living with us, actually in our house. And that's been their approach. For them, if they continue to follow Islam, many of them have left it. But those who do, they would say, well, this is my personal thing. It's about my piety and whatever. And where they don't have this bigger political agenda of seeking to undermine and ultimately overthrow any non-Muslim society, then the two can live together in peace. But my concern, and as Dr. Nihad has said, in the charter of the Muslim Brotherhood is the establishment of an international global caliphate, then the two can't live side by side, because there'll always be this sense that they have this other agenda, which they may not necessarily declare at the beginning. They'll keep it quiet. They'll present themselves as people sharing the same values and using the institutions of the West ultimately to undermine and overthrow the West. And I don't think that's going to make for a very peaceful society, unfortunately.
Dr. Nihad, would you like just to reply? Because I am a question to you, and I'm sure you're going to say yes, they can coexist, but can Islam and Western society as it is now coexist?
Well, the question here is addressed really differently, because the question was about Islam, not the Brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I do differentiate between both of them. Ideological politics, it's very pragmatic. The Brotherhood proved to be a very pragmatic organization. They did have their democratic participation in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Egypt, and as it's well known in the Palestinian occupied territories, etc., etc. So in Turkey, many they attribute Erdogan and his party to the Brotherhood and to the very well established prominent Brotherhood leadership as well. Many with the conspiracy theories, they say actually the main cabinet of the leadership of the Brotherhood exists in Istanbul. But the coexistence, if it comes to the Islam, from the Quranic point of view, it's 100%. The coexistence can happen very easily, very positively, And I think even Quran is encouraging for the coexistence, 100%. And this is something I can prove with many different exegetical point of views coming from the Quran. So I don't see really any reason, especially that we are all promoting something called the universal values. And the universal values at least can provide us the common ground to coexist. And this is something I cannot really, to me, at least from my personal point of view, that the coexistent is something necessary, is something important for the humanity prosperity. If we are to disturb this process, the coexistence, it means we are in a real trouble. Whether we are talking about Muslims, non-Muslims, Christians, Jews, and even the non-believers, the people who don't really have any kind of faith. So coexistence, it's a human need, and that one is really in a serious need to be pushed, promoted, and then made it easy for everyone to coexist and to live together.
We have to, we're running out of time to wrap it up though, but I just want to ask Nuria, because I have to say, I find Islam a very interesting culture or religion. I do. I find it, it's steeped in history. Also aware of all sorts of, and all religions have had. Look at the Christian religion. I mean, they went through villages and chopped people's heads off. I blessed them first and then chopped their heads off because they said they'd go to heaven. In the name of religion, we've had many discrepancies or atrocities over the centuries, thousands of years. The problem at the moment, and I'll address this to everybody, Nuria, is the problem at the moment, is it ignorance?
I believe so, yes. I think this view that Islam can be put on the same kind of pedestal as any other religion, as a benign personal faith that you can practice at home, and there's no way it would seep into the political or any other sphere of life, is quite ignorant. Because the main thing here is the separation of religion and politics, which, yes, the Christian world has managed to achieve. But when you talk about Islam and you look at, like, even with the Brotherhood, they consider the Quran their constitution. It's very good. I'm glad we've got Muslims out there who can suspend those same beliefs when it comes to reading the same verses from the Quran and not getting a politicized agenda out of it. But just to answer your question very briefly, yes, I think there's a lot of ignorance at the minute. But the internet is very quickly changing that, because, as a Muslim myself, all these texts were in classical Arabic and almost some mystified writings that were on a bookshelf in your family home that you never really are supposed to touch. And now we've got access to, Muhammad's the historical kind of origins, the foundational texts of Islam, the hadiths, which are one of the biggest corpus of texts for the Sunni stream of branch of Islam, which is what the Brotherhood follow as well. It's all available there. You can type with keywords, and I think this is why we're seeing a huge apostasy avalanche coming out of the Middle East and the subcontinent, because people are reading it now in their own languages and thinking, actually, that makes a lot of sense why you get Boko Haram and ISIS and Al-Qaeda coming out from these very sources.
Bernie.
Yeah, I think ignorance is really the biggest issue, and it's on both sides. I think people in the West are, and the word Dr. Andy had used before, naive. They're not quite aware of the teachings or the charter of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they just assume that everybody must be like us. We believe in freedom, we believe in equality, we believe in justice. Therefore, everybody else must believe that as well. That's part of the human condition. But in fact, it's not. It's not something that's equally shared across all religions. And I think there's also a lot of ignorance in terms of the Muslim side, in terms of the way that they understand their own scriptures. And, just read this one from Surah 98, verse 6. It says, "Those who disbelieve in the religion of Islam, those who disbelieve from among the people of the Scripture, that's the Jews and the Christians, and the mushrikun, that is the pagans, will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of creatures." And I've had Muslims quote that to me because I'm a Christian, and say, "This is who you are in our sight." But most Muslims wouldn't know that, they wouldn't believe that. But this is part of the kind of ignorance or misunderstanding that people have in their worldviews, and So I think we need to keep both sides, the ignorance of both sides, in our minds.
And Dr. Nihad, same question to you.
Yes, ignorance is an aberrant obstacle, really, to get a proper understanding of what's happening. And I believe this is why I believe in the existence of Islamophobia. Islamophobia is built upon what Edward Said had written about in his Orientalism in 1978, which is belonged to the Orientalists' approach towards Islam, when it was really serving the colonial project of the Middle East, where a lot of distortions were brought about to the public, and the public didn't have really any means in order to investigate what's going on. So the conflation between the colonial ideas, the colonial control and governance of the Orient, and literally later it became the Muslim world, brought about a lot of ignorance, where many they misunderstood, misinterpreted, and then they got the misconception about Islam as a whole. And a lot of conflation is happening as well, and unfortunately it's happening in the academic community, between Muslims coming from traditional backgrounds, mixing and conflating between their own social traditions and Islam as it was revealed in the book or in the text. So the overall story, I would certainly comfortably saying it's about ignorance by the Muslims themselves. Many of the Muslims, I wouldn't really generalize my conclusion here, but on the other hand, a lot of misconceptions coming from the ignorance of the non-Muslims on Islam and the Muslims as well.
Adam, thank you so much for your time. We have run out of time, and I think I always say this to our guest: we should continue with the discussion because we're just getting warmed up. Nouria Khan, ex-Muslim and host of Beyond Belief, Dr. Bernie Power, Melbourne School of Theology, and Dr. Nihad Kanfar, senior lecturer in law and politics. Thank you very much for your time. I've appreciated it. I think the takeaways is that we have learned something, and we are ignorant. And I think ignorance is a dangerous tool, and it can also be used from anyone, any organisation. They can use ignorance as a weapon, and I think part of the societies this day and age is that we don't know much. And you mentioned, Nouria, about the internet. It also tells lies, and so we need to be, I suppose, educate ourselves, or to be educated, and to broaden our horizons, because ignorance will not allow anybody to grow, any organisation to grow. And I think we do need to talk about it more. Maybe that's what we need to do, is just talk about it more. But don't tell the British government that, for God's sake. They won't stand for that. This has been The Protagonists, and this is The World Today.